I'm going to give it just one more minute before we get started. Great to see all of the familiar names that I see here. Thank you, Councilmember Mary Norwood, for being here. I see a number of Friends of the Park advocates that are familiar to me. And I also see Hannah Jones is here from Supporter Report. So excited to see all of you joining us here today. For those that are just joining us, you'll notice that in the chat function, folks are showing up and representing. I see Pauline Drake just chimed in, so please take a moment and greet the rest of us. Let us know who you are and say hello. We'll be using this chat function to share your observations and to communicate with one another throughout the session. Donna Stevens, happy birthday. I know you just had a birthday, so that's great to see you joining us. Okay, I could just enjoy perusing your chats for the next 20 minutes, but that wouldn't get us forward in our conversation today. So for those who have just joined us, again, please continue to tell us who you are in the chat. I wanted to take a moment first just to thank you all for taking some time out of your busy day to focus on today's topic. Our topic is moving parks forward, a conversation on Atlanta's park system. And today's topic is a very timely one. At the end of last year, Atlanta City Council unanimously approved the adoption of Activate ATL, Recreation and Parks for All. And this is the City of Atlanta's Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the first plan in a decade that will guide our parks and recreation system over the next 10 years. And since that time, the Department of Parks and Recreation has developed a strategic plan that really moves into the implementation of this plan. So we're excited to have that complement of something that's looking at harnessing their staffing and capacity towards this vision. We also have a recent bond measure that secured $93 million towards parks-related investments that were part of $750 million of measures for infrastructural improvements across a wide range of different issues. So certainly $93 million is a start, but there's a challenging road ahead. Many are aware that Activate ATL identified a $700 million backlog in park maintenance needs. So, and not all of that $93 million goes towards that backlog. It certainly makes a dent, but there's still much to be done. And if that wasn't relevant enough for you, many of you are aware that we are in budget season. So we did have a committed group of green shirts that showed up wearing these I Heart Park shirts at the presentation of the parks budget, as well as to make public comments at the hearing. Right now, we do not see a meaningful increase in the budget that helps to implement the aims and aspirations of Activate ATL. And when we look at the tagline of Recreation and Parks for All, we're really hoping to see creating the context for growth within the department and growth in areas such as park maintenance. So all of that brings us to focusing on the larger system. And if we'll go on to the next slide, I'll just touch upon the agenda. This is pretty fast. We have about 20 minutes of panel presentations from two of our different panelists. Then we will open it up to all three. I'll ask a couple of questions to get us started for about 10 minutes. We'll have about 20 minutes of audience Q&A, and then we'll wrap things up. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared via email. So wanted to both remind our folks on the IT side of things to make sure we're recording, and also wanted to just put in a ping that we will have a short satisfaction survey following the program and would love your feedback. These sessions make sense when you engage and share with us what you'd like to see. Next, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our corporate champions. These include generous sponsors like the Home Depot Foundation, Bank of America, Cox, Georgia Pacific, and Georgia Power. Thanks to all of our sponsors that make these types of events possible and allow us to spend our lunch break with each of you and dealing with important topics such as Atlanta's Parks and Recreation System. So now let me say a word about just the roundtable aspects of this meeting. There are two different areas that we will be using. One area of functionality is the Q&A feature, and that's the place to submit questions. You can do that at any time. So as you're hearing from our speakers in their presentations, you're welcome to put questions in the Q&A. Questions do come with question marks at the end, so I would encourage you to put commentary more in the chat area, to share your observations, and to engage with the larger group in the chat area. But any of your questions, I would ask you to put them in the Q&A section. So with that, I'd like to jump right into the program. Again, our topic is moving parks forward, a conversation on Atlanta's park system. I did want to start with just sharing with you what we advertised this session and to read you a brief description, and then we'll get to our speakers. The session we described in this way: is Atlanta embarks on a new chapter under the leadership of Mayor Dickens, and with Activate ATL serving as the guide for our parks and recreation system, the future appears bright for local parks. However, it is important to examine the city's past to understand what is required to move forward to a stronger, more equitable park system that serves all Atlantans. How has Atlanta's history impacted the state of our park system? What catalyzed Atlanta's jump from 49th to 27th on the 2022 ParkScore Index? How can we advance an equitable park system where every Atlantan has access to a quality park? And how does Atlanta fit into the national context of park leadership and innovation? How do we move Atlanta and our park system forward? And we'll dig into those and other questions. Today, our panelists include Linda Huang, Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at the Trust for Public Land, Tara Buckner, Urban Planner at the City of Atlanta's Department of Parks and Recreation, and then George Dusenberry, Georgia State Director with the Trust for Public Land. I'd like to start off to turn it over to Linda and ask for her to share a little bit about this park score and the fact that we have moved up from 49th to 27th. And if you could share some of your observations on what catalyzed Atlanta's jump, and also just set the table for this conversation on the park score and how it helps to evaluate systems across the country. Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thank you to Park Pride and all the sponsors for this really great event. It's always exciting to talk more about parks, and especially about a really stellar park system like what y'all have down there in Atlanta. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just briefly what ParkScore, go to the next slide, thank you. So the Trust for Public Land ranks the park systems of the 100 largest cities. And we look at 5 categories: acreage, access, equity, investment, and amenities. And it's a big data collection effort that begins in the fall, actually the previous year, where we send kind of what we consider a paper-based survey to all of the organizations, nonprofits, park-related organizations, city park departments, give us a lot of information on these categories. And then we also collect spatial data, so park locations and their boundaries and access points as well. So it just gives you a high-level look at what ParkScore measures across the board for these 100 largest cities. Next slide, please. So you can see the results here. What I'm going to do is just talk at a high level, then we'll drill down at Atlanta. But you can see this is the top 10. We've been ranking these city park systems since 2014. And so We started with 45 and have gradually made our way up to the 100 largest cities. But over the last, I would say 3 or 4 years, we haven't seen too much change within the top 10. We did see a significant jump from Cincinnati, and it was due largely to them putting in place joint use schoolyards, where schoolyards are open to the public after school hours and they become available to the whole community. So that's our top 10 here. Next slide, please. One of the big findings, I'll tell you, just from this year, we were really excited to drill down into what park systems are doing to take climate action. We pick a big theme every year that we can collect just a lot more data and go do a deeper dive in. And this year we were very curious to know what cities were doing, just because we've heard over the years a lot of really exciting, innovative anecdotes from park agencies on what they're doing. And it was just a fantastic finding for us to learn that 85 of the cities that we're measuring are taking some significant action on climate change. Primarily it is around reducing the effects of the urban heat island through planting trees for shade. They're really they're keeping some of their parks open after dark, installing cooling stations as well, trying to take advantage of portable splash pads to keep folks cool. A lot of folks are dealing with the impacts, trying to reduce the impacts from flooding through vegetation and very strategic planting of bioswales. And then we also have some really interesting efforts around reducing carbon emissions. So people are really trying to track, where there are opportunities to produce renewable energy through solar installations, electrifying vehicles and different equipment, thinking about LEED building standards to improve the efficiency of their buildings as well. And so it was just a tremendous finding that we were really excited to report out this year. And you can see a lot more of that detail if you guys want to dig in. We released a report that goes with the index this year as well. Next slide, please. So we'll get in a little bit into Atlanta, and I think that'll help us kind of set the tone for the rest of this discussion here today, Michael. But you can see when we look at cities, we do a analysis based on density, and we adjust the land area and we remove unpopulated areas like rail yards, airports, water bodies. And so Atlanta falls into a category of what we call medium to low density cities. This is 43 cities among the 100 largest. And this just gives you a sense for where Atlanta comes in. You can see across the 5 categories where Atlanta is doing well, where they have a lot of areas for opportunities for improvement. And I can talk a little bit. So that's just a quick snapshot. I would encourage you all to go to parkscore.org and you can drill down into Atlanta's numbers very specifically. I see there's a link in the chat there right now. So next slide, just to drill in a little bit, gives you a little historic context for where Atlanta has been. We introduced our park equity category just last year, which is why you only see data for 2021 and 2022. But I'll tell you, Atlanta rose 22 spots in this last year, due in large part to increased spending associated with major new park initiatives. So very specifically, Cook Park and the West Side Quarry Park. And additionally, the city did recently complete the Park Master Plan, Activate ATL, which we're so excited about. And that led to some major data improvements in terms of partnership spending. So we added spending and parkland from the Beltline that was not previously included. And we also had new park access points. These were green spaces managed by the Department of Watershed Management that had previously been excluded. And so you can see that Atlanta, in particular on investments, they've jumped up significantly and are now ranked among the in the top tier, I guess you could say, across ParkScore cities when it comes to investments and spending. So that's a lot of good things that Atlanta is doing. One thing I'll just call out, I did see somebody from the South Fork Conservancy. We're so excited to learn from you folks that you secured funds to build a bridge that connected an apartment complex with a new park, and in part by showing that those families did not have access to any parks within a 10-minute walk of where they lived. And so those efforts and others like that have helped to increase Atlanta's 10-minute walk score from 72% last year to 77% this year. So we love those kinds of stories of how people are using ParkScore, and that's exactly why we've created this index, to help all of you advocate for your parks, advocate for funding, for more resources, and for more support across the board. And that's it. Pass it back to you, Michael.
Excellent. And before we go on, I kind of jumped the queue a little bit, and there's a thing I'm fond of, that people don't care what you know unless they know you care. And I stepped over the effort of you just sharing a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work. So if you don't mind, before we move on to Tara, just sharing a little bit about your role at TPL and your passion for these issues.
Yeah, I feel like I grew up going to the park because I had a skateboard and a big wheel that could get me down to the end of my block, where I had a very, very small park that I just lived in with my siblings and all the kids around the block in my neighborhood. I grew up just outside Ann Arbor in Michigan. And then from there, we had a neighborhood park that we could all walk to and bike to as a family. And then for larger efforts, my family belonged to a big church. We had a big community, and we would all get together at a regional park. And this was, again, for those of you familiar with Southeastern Michigan, it's the Huron-Clinton Metro Parks. And it wasn't until I got to TPL until I understood, there are these differences in park types and different agencies that manage parks differently, or different size parks. And so today I am part of a department at TPL called the Land and People Lab. And we are focused entirely on bringing forward the evidence of all of the benefits that people enjoy when they have good access to the outdoors. So we're a big team that is primarily the data backbone for the organization. And then we now have these fantastic content experts that help us drive climate action, community health, community strategies, and park equity. And we work to really support the good work of our field teams. George Dusenberry leads a fantastic field team. We're working on great parks like Cook Park, and then trying to support park agencies like Tara's team and all these great conservancies that you guys have there in the city of Atlanta that's just doing so much great work. So we're really here to help you all elevate the importance and the need for parks through data, through good decisions, and through as much support as we can.
That's great. Well, we're very fortunate to have you with us here today, Linda, and we will be digging a little bit more into your presentation to the Q&A. Before we go there, I'm going to call up, and I see Tara Buckner here with the city skyline behind her, and I'm going to reverse things this time, and maybe you can share a little bit, Tara, about yourself and your passion for these issues, and then we can get into a brief presentation on Activate ATL and the work that you've been up to.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Actually, it's afternoon now here. But I'm Tara Buckner, and I'm the urban planner for the Department of Parks and Recreation with the City of Atlanta. I will tell you, my background is in planning, urban planning, economic development, and in management. I have worked on master plans and zoning plans in 3 of the 4 cities that I've worked in. I've worked in Detroit, Minneapolis, St. Louis, and Atlanta. I am a certified planner, AICP, and I am a graduate of Spelman College, proud graduate of Spelman College and Wayne State University in Detroit. My experience in parks starts as a child in North Minneapolis, and I often still visit the block that I grew up on or spent half of my years on because my best friend lives there. And when I was in 7th grade, we moved to Golden Valley, which is the suburb just adjacent to North Minneapolis, and got a wonderful experience with parks, did all kinds of things, basketball, sledding. I still go sledding in Minneapolis sometimes. And so I've had many experiences that make me love to be a part of Atlanta's park system. But that being said, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Activate ATL and start with the first slide there. Okay, well, we are pleased that our plan was adopted by the City Council back in December of 2020. And in that plan, there are many, there are both aspirations and there's a vision and a list of activities that we need to accomplish over the next 10 years. It took us 2 years to develop the plan, and thank you, any of you who helped and provided us with input in that plan. It had the most robust public engagement effort that the City of Atlanta Parks Department has ever undertaken. And we're quite pleased with that. Let me just say that, may I talk about the history of parks a little bit here? Okay. So as I said, when I first started, I'm a planner here. I also went to Spelman College, which was located here. And so when I look at the park system of what I saw back in the early 80s, and I'm dating myself, some of the challenges that we have here in the city of Atlanta still exist. We still have a level of racial segregation. And of course, income plays a lot into that. But when we look at our park system, if we look at the location of Atlanta, starting with first slavery, and then Jim Crow laws, and then a thing called redlining. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with redlining, it is it was a policy in many cities where loans or insurance were refused to people because of the color of their skin and them being deemed a poor financial risk. So this map that you're looking at right here shows you that the challenges of redlining here in Atlanta. The areas in Black are areas where African Americans were able to live. And the green areas, of course, are our parks. And if you're able to look closely, there aren't that many parks in those areas. If you flip to the next slide, you will see that, and again, the redlined areas are in Black. Black people live in that darker red area. And as you can see, that covers much of that redlined area. And then I'd like to flip to the next slide and show you median income. This time, the darker areas are the higher income areas. And as you can see, if you were to, and then one more map I'd like to show, the food deserts and obesity. If you look at these, this is a map where the darker areas are where you have the higher prevalence of obesity and food deserts in the city of Atlanta. So if you overlay all of these areas with the redlined areas, you will see that if you are African American and if you are of lower income, our parks may not be getting the same kind of consideration. And so in addition to this challenge, while it's not intentional, conservancies in the city of Atlanta, which pretty much are agencies, nonprofit agencies that support um, our parks. And they do a great job of that, but they're mostly the regional parks. But at the same time, those conservancies are so old that even the new conservancies that start and raise money for individual parks will probably never be able to catch up to the financial support that our conservancies in those older areas are. And so with that, I'd just like to say that while we don't want to discourage conservancies because they're great vehicles that are and great partners, we realize that the system is unequal. And so we have to work a little harder in the areas to provide equity in the other areas that do not have conservancies.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara, for that overview, and thank you for taking us through that geographic orientation of kind of the history of kind of how we got to this point. I also did want to point out that there was a link that was provided to the full Activate ATL plan, and it goes through a plan of looking at the resources needed across the board throughout the city to move from where we're at right now to where we need to go. So if you're not familiar with the Activate ATL plan, I would encourage you to check it out. At this point, I'd like to get into some questions from each of our panelists. And before we go to my first question, I did want to take a moment to recognize George Dusenberry, who is rounding out this panel. We did not put him into the group of actually slides and presentations, but given his long history working in my role, former Parks Commissioner and State Director for TPL, is an important voice on this conversation. And I would ask for George to share a little bit of his why, of how he got involved in this work and why parks are so important to him. And you're muted, George.
It's not a Zoom presentation if somebody doesn't do that, so I'm glad to oblige. Thank you for the quick introduction, Michael. For me, I love the outdoors. I feel very strongly about the environment and have been active that for a long time throughout my career. And then I really like working with people to help them and make their lives better. And parks are kind of, if you had that Venn diagram, that's where it all overlaps. And I didn't know that when I started off on this journey, but as I progressed working with Congressman John Lewis and through the roles that you described, Michael, just have found more and more that parks are where a community comes together to make the world a better place. And I enjoy being in that space. That's really it for me.
Excellent. So my first question I would like to put out there to each of our different panelists, and points will be given for brevity. So I would love to try and get into some questions and then get to our audience Q&A. The first question, I'd like to look at the issues that were elevated through Tara's portion of the presentation, as well as looking at those areas of improvement that were identified in Linda's presentation. How can we advance an equitable park system where every Atlantan has access to a quality park? And let's go in the order of the speakers that we just heard from. So maybe Linda, Tara, and then George.
Yeah, well, one thing is to be aware of where your challenge areas are. So now you have this Activate ATL park plan, you have the ParkScore data, there are maps. The first thing you can do is just be aware of where the park equity divide is in Atlanta, who has access, who does not. And what we track is also the size of the park. So it may be the case that people have a 10-minute walk park available to them, but when they get there, it could be much, much smaller. And it could be that you're sharing that park with a lot of other people. And that stark reality became much more clear during COVID, in the early days of COVID, when people were flocking to parks. We were all trying to keep a safe physical distance from each other. And we realized we're out here with a lot more people in some of our parks. So just getting a handle on what the nature of the park equity divide is in Atlanta is a really good place to start. I'll pass it to Tara.
Thank you.
Tara.
Hey, thanks. Well, I think, first of all, Activate ATL is a great starting point for us here in the city of Atlanta Parks Department. Our master plan, Activate ATL, started with equity as a focal point. Prior to that, the plan that we had uh, didn't have the same level of community involvement, community feedback, but also the idea that we aren't like underskirting the importance of race in how things have developed, and using NRPA's definition of equity, which is the just and fair quantity, proximity, and connections to quality parks and green space recreation facilities, as well as programs that are safe, inclusive, culturally relevant, and welcoming to everyone. Um, that frames the way we want to, again, develop our park system. So our Activate ATL plan supports that. We put several tools in place, starting with our goals, which are to invest, connect, and grow. Invest meaning we need to really look at the maintenance situation in the city and making sure that all of our parks, whether you go to parks in the north or in the south, that they are in great shape. Connect. One of the things that we discovered under the plan is that many people didn't even know what we already offer. So making sure that our citizens know what we offer, and also listening to their feedback. One of the things that we developed in Activate ATL is the Happy Feet app. We have an app that you can just go to and tell us what you think about our parks. Our park is great. I love the tree canopy, or things that we don't, we're not too proud of. Hey, this bench needs to be fixed and it hasn't been fixed in a while. But then lastly, of course, grow. As we look at the city of Atlanta, and its growth over the next 30 years, we want to make sure that we're in front of that growth and using every opportunity that we can to include parks. So addressing things such as the 10-minute walk campaign that TPL has. We have signed on to making sure that we are investing. And the beautiful thing about that is that 77% of all Atlantans right now live within a 10-minute walk of a park. Unfortunately, the devil is in the details, and that is residents that live in neighborhoods that are historically Black and brown have 48% less park space. And so, again, growing our parks and using that TPL system as a guide. And then lastly, addressing the intersectionality of issues. That is blight and safety and crime and homelessness. And when developers come to develop affordable housing, making sure that there's a park within that space, or working with the developer to make sure that there's open space for the residents of that community. And then of course, adding amenities. One last thing I want to point out about our master plan is that we have developed the equity data tool. And very soon, hopefully this month, we will be unveiling the system where any individual can go to our website and look at the ranking of the parks in their neighborhood and all over the city, starting with the 10 parks, the top 10 parks with the greatest need. And right now we're in the process of going back through those parks and making sure that we are looking at, what needs to happen to make those parks that are of greatest need, how we can make them better. So we just
Thank
looked
you,
to
Tara.
Activate ATL.
So
So George, same question.
yeah, I'll pick up on something that Tara said. She talked a lot about conservancies. And when I was in Michael's role, a lot of people would come up to me and they would say, well, our neighbor group want to be like the Piedmont Park Conservancy. And I was like, no, you don't, because they have to raise a whole lot of money and they do a whole lot of work to make the park better. What you really want is you want to have access to a park like Piedmont Park in your community. And I think really kind of that's the overarching goal of what everybody wants, and they're willing to do it. But so number one, we need just more parks. Everybody needs a Piedmont Park in their community, or maybe something smaller. And then second, talking about the maintenance and the support the conservancies do, there's conservancies, friends of park groups get their revenue, get their money from the community they worked in, from businesses and from foundations and philanthropy. There's only so much that businesses and philanthropy can do. And Tara touched on that when she spoke. We can't, creating more conservancies is not the solution to better maintaining our parks and making sure that parks are equitably maintained around the city. And communities that have more capacity, more wealth, and those red line maps that Tara showed did a pretty good job of delineating that. They're going to have better maintained parks unless the city steps up and maintains its parks to a higher standard than it has been doing. So I think those are two things. We need to get more parks like Piedmont Park. Every community deserves access to something like that. And once you have that park in place, you need the city stepping up and maintaining that park to a similar standard.
And point well taken, Michael, but I will also say one of the things that I see here in Atlanta is that our community and neighborhood level parks are underutilized. Those are the parks where you live across the street and you can walk right into the park, and there's a playground there, there's a running track, there are wonderful things for you to be able to do where you don't necessarily need the tennis building or the museum. And
Yep.
while I would say, our regional parks are great, it's great to have regional parks, but you're not always going to go to a regional park for your pleasure and enjoyment. So Activate ATL talks about the importance of those neighborhood parks and those community parks as a way to, again, address the food desert, address the obesity challenge and other issues. And that requires maintenance.
Yeah, that actually is a good segue also into one of the questions that was posed in the Q&A. And considering the increase in the park investment was one of the largest factors that catalyzed Atlanta's jump in the park score. Where did that investment go? That is land acquisition, new park staffing. So when you look at the leap that we've seen, putting our money where our mouth is, where has the investment been? And how does that kind of relate to Tara's comment over, how are we balancing kind of the big splash kinds of examples of parks versus the ones that are more neighborhood and local? Who'd like to take the question of just kind of analyzing the jump?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you just the jump, just in the ParkScore ranking, it was due almost entirely to spending associated with these two specific new park initiatives. So Cook Park and Westside Quarry Park. It's a 3-year spent average. And so when you see a lot of investments going in 1 year, it's going to make that jump. So it's not the case that there was all this spending and it was, it all got distributed across the whole park system. And I think, we feel a lot of pride in Cook Park, given the fact that that neighborhood has been historically neglected and that the people in that community came together to help design that park. And it's designed very specifically to be climate smart as well. So I think it's a really good example of where the city of Atlanta is saying, okay, where are the neighborhoods that have been neglected? Let's take a look at those and let's do as much as we can in this place, because we're going to make an investment. We want to make it beautiful. We want to inspire people, but let's be practical. Let's get it climate smart as well. Let's take care of the flooding, address any extreme heat, and bring the community out.
And I
so that raises. question just on kind of maintaining that status that we have right now, that we have gone way up, and in order to maintain that ranking, it's that sustained effort over time that I think is a good segue into our 10-year master plan.
Well, and let me just say that not just the investment, but also the acreage, the increase in acreage of those two parks. Those are very large parks. And so being able to say that we now have that those spaces is really, really important. I also want to say that in terms of our ParkScore, we took account of what we had. We have 376 parks, but then there are also some open spaces that our Department of Watershed Management manages. And so Cook Park is an example of the partnership between DPR and of course TPL, but also our Department of Watershed Management, and using those spaces to accomplish more than just one thing. And I forgot the question, so tell me again what the question was.
Michael also pointed out Lake Charlotte also was another park. So that was largely driven by capital investment, Michael, to your point, in terms of building out these parks. And we're seeing there's existing future capital investment coming too, in terms of the acquisition of the Chattahoochee Brick site that the city just did, which was $27 million. And then also the money that Beltline is raising in terms of building out the trail. So you're going to see that, but I think it highlights that as we're bringing more acreage and more parks online, that maintenance becomes more and more important.
I think that's a valid point, and I also will share that it seems to me that that question and looking at where those investments are, that to Tara's point, these large-scale park investments have not been in the more affluent parts of town. We have now destination parks that are in areas that do not have wealthy adjacent property owners that are willing to supplement maintenance costs and that kind of thing. So there is a question over what is the plan in those different areas, because as we get beyond the kind of warranty period of maintenance being covered outside of the city, that'll put greater pressure on either the city to maintain those parks differently than the Piedmont parks, or we will see them fall into the conditions that led to the creation of those different conservancies. So I saw that my friend Odetta McLeish White had asked a question that really is looking at the fact that parks are not islands unto themselves. So how might Parks and Recreation and stakeholders support proactive anti-displacement strategies to advance and strengthen racially equitable access to parks? So who'd like to take that one on?
I can start, and then George and Tara, I'm sure you guys have thoughts as well, but it's such a good question, and we have a couple of things that are playing out in real time, I would say, across the country right now. A lot of people point to, in Washington, D.C., there's the 11th Street Bridge Park going over the Anacostia River right now, and it's linking two neighborhoods that historically have been really walled off from each other. So that park, in addition to TPL's working on a park in the southern end of San Francisco called India Basin. Both neighborhoods there's a lot of potential for gentrification that can lead to displacement. And that's what we're trying to effectively get ahead of. And what we do is, when we hear the community voice these concerns over things like housing costs, housing availability, workforce development, youth engagement, all of these things that people are really worried about that may lead to displacement, what we try to do is incorporate those into our park planning process. So we may, in the past, I think a lot of organizations like TPL may have said, well, look, that's kind of out of our lane. We're just here to build the park. We're maintaining a construction schedule. We're trying to put the benches where they need to be and the riprap and all that good stuff. I think what we're saying increasingly now is, okay, great. We've heard these issues raised, and they now we're gonna track them as much as we are tracking a construction budget and a construction timeline. That we are now trying to say, great, we're gonna bring in other experts who know a lot about housing availability and policies that relate to protecting that. We're gonna bring experts in who also can talk about youth engagement and workforce development. It relieves us of the burden of trying to be experts and be everyone to, be everything to everyone all the time. But if we bring those folks in and they are part of the park development process that we facilitate, that's how we feel like we can at least try to get ahead of these issues, make sure that there are always partners from the city who are hearing these things as well, who can be thinking about policies to try to get ahead of that displacement that could come.
And I'm in total agreement with that. Again, the intersectionality of all these issues and the displacement. Again, understanding that our city needs, it's up to us as public employees to make sure that we are having these conversations about affordable housing and making sure that we are bringing in the partners, private, other public partners, to make sure that we are achieving the goals that we are talking about in our plan, Invest, Connect, and Grow. But that the affordable housing challenge is often a conversation that people have, and then it goes away. And then you're kind of always constantly talking about it. But if we can continue to use our partners and direct our partners into the places where we need better parks, better maintenance, and working, of course, lastly with our citizens. I think that the difference that Activate ATL will make is that in developing it, we did everything we could in the middle of a pandemic to involve the citizens that would be affected by the plan. And let me lastly say that we developed, after we did Activate ATL, we immediately developed a strategic plan that covers the first 5 years. And so we're constantly talking about how we partner with our partners and where development is taking place. Again, I think that's the direction we need to be going.
And if I can chime in.
Well, let me ask.
Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead, George.
Well, I want to take my TPL hat off and put on my Decatur hat on. I think if you're waiting for a park to be built before you have a conversation about displacement and affordable housing, you're waiting too late. Decatur, we have had probably more displacement than any other jurisdiction in Metro Atlanta, and we don't have any great parks. But we actually have taken steps holistically to address it. And one thing I learned recently is like 20 years ago, we created a program that allows people, low-income individuals, elderly, to basically defer their property taxes until they sell their house or move the house. And so there are programs out there that the cities need to be adopting and moving forward in all communities, not just communities with new parks. But then, as both Tara and Linda said, it is important for us to be intentional, understand that when we're doing these parks, we need to do that. And I want to give a shout out to the Westside Future Fund, who is a really great partner in terms of helping us do that around Cook Park, where they had a number of really innovative programs to help keep folks in their homes.
Thank you. I want to come back to Tara with, and actually before we go there, this is something that Linda had answered a question earlier, but I saw a question of, is our score going to go down dramatically next year now that Cook Park and Westside Park are open? How would you respond to that question, Linda?
That's hard to say, only because what happened, it's only 100 cities. And so you're being measured against other cities. And so you could do nothing different between this year and next year, and you may drop in the rankings because other cities stepped up in a significant way. Or you may increase because everybody else said, oh no, we had to remove a bunch of bathrooms because we just couldn't maintain them, or, for whatever reason. So it's not, I would focus less on the year-to-year change and really think about using ParkScore as a mechanism to get people to understand how important your park system is. I think the ranking itself, I'll be very honest with everybody, the ranking is just sort of the eye candy to get everybody to pay attention, because everybody loves the top 10 list. But what we like is the way that, you know, South Forks uses to make the case for parks. And that's what we want to keep people's focus on, and the good work that the city of Atlanta has been doing for a while.
No, I think that's valid. I think it's also worth mentioning to folks that the Arctic continues to change as you've refined and improved the park score to include measures like philanthropy and equity. So I guess the focus is, let's not teach to the test. Let's use this as a tool to prompt, you know, kind of engagement and marshaling of resources, which again brings us back to our local plans.
I think it's like the Celtics and the Warriors. I mean, you get to be at that level. You get to be in the playoffs by continuing to work your game. And so that is what we should be doing here in DPR. And our strategic plan, which is, again, from our master plan, is how we're going to get even higher next year, Linda.
Related question came from Atlanta Beltline Partnership. Has the city quantified and publicly stated how much it would cost to maintain parks at the prescribed standard and Activate ATL? Until we know that number, we can't mobilize to raise the funds needed.
That's a loaded question. Because I've, you know, so we have a number that we have been working with in terms of our capital improvements. And then there's, of course, the programming, which can, you know, be as large or as small. But if we just use that capital number around $700 million, I would like everybody today to go out there and start looking for additional support for us. But that doesn't have to be, so all the funds that we need here, we need support with our volunteers, with our partnerships. Some our Park Pride certainly takes on a huge part of, you know, what is required for our parks. But that's my answer.
Yeah. No, I think that's a valid point. I'm going to keep moving on these questions because I see we're in the lightning round. We have about 8 minutes left. What are the low-hanging fruit areas that we can advance the park score the most?
I'll tell you what we're seeing a lot of other cities do, and I think there's opportunity. It is looking at schoolyards and transforming them into community schoolyards. It's looking at these developer-owned lands and looking at lands owned by other public agencies like the watershed management group that you guys have there. We have a bunch of people looking at vacant lots, abandoned rail yards, utility-owned lands, and then even dead retail parking lots to be converted. So a lot of opportunity, and that's the low-hanging fruit.
Thank you. That's a great answer to that question. I'm going to pose a question that's kind of in a related question that kind of gets to the partners. I see this question that I think is intriguing. What is DPR doing to partner with Public Works to make sure there are safe sidewalks, crosswalks, and bus shelters available to parks from neighborhood residences that are within that 10-minute walk? So looking not just as the crow flies, but looking at making sure that there is a safe walk to that park or transit or bike ride. Who'd like to take that question?
I can. So yes, the pathways to our parks are very important to how you get to our parks. And I think especially as we develop new parks, we continue to work on how we can, have improved connections to our park. That's a part of our connect. But in addition to that, we are also looking at how our already existing parks are and the connections to the parks.
If I could tie in that along with Linda's answer about schoolyards. So Park Pride, TPL, and the Urban Land Institute have a community schoolyards program here where we're trying to increase access and we'll have 10 schools open to the community. And as part of that, Urban Land Institute actually has done an assessment of the 10-minute walk, almost like was it Safe Routes to School on steroids, and provided that information to council members and to Public Works. And so, I think that's a way that we can do that. You do that for your parks, not just your schoolyards.
So I'm going to go to a question that was the very first question that was asked, and I feel like I wouldn't be that trusted partner if I didn't bring it up. So I am going to bring up. Joe Perry had asked a question about the 85 acres of forest under threat that by the Atlanta Police Foundation at the Atlanta Prison Farm. He also brought up the issues with the land swap involving Blackhall. How can we hope to maintain a vision of the South River Forest in Southeast Atlanta and Southwest DeKalb? We are fighting to save our forest, but we need help. And I'll take that question and just share. So looking at this group that's really focused on the conversation today on the city of Atlanta is at best half of that question, because a lot of the different areas you're mentioning are outside of the jurisdiction of city of Atlanta. And then you have the areas that are city of Atlanta property that are within DeKalb County. That's a whole separate side issue. But I come back to Atlanta city design, that in the idea of a larger plan for Atlanta that was on the spirit and energy of Plan of Chicago, which I think is still a rallying point for folks across the city. It has concepts such as the Chattahoochee Riverlands effort that TPL has been leading the charge, and the South River Forest on the southeast quadrant of the city. And I would say that right now, part of the challenge is that there are folks that have decided their positions that are either for or against on different efforts to preserve land and park space, those that are pushing other agendas. And I really think coming back to basics of looking at the vision to expand the conversation, because I think that unfortunately, as things become more and more entrenched, the audience that's actually paying attention dwindles, and the possibility of moving things forward, I think, is challenging. We do have, under the leadership of Mayor Dickens, things like the Green Cabinet, the Green Space Advisory Council that's come forward. And so I will just offer, number one, to have a conversation separately, but to share that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect a different result. And I think if you want to get to the point of bringing that vision of the South River Forest back to that level that it was back when Ryan Gravel and Tim Keene put it forward, I think something different is needed to kind of get to that larger conversation. So I'll put that out there, and again, offer to talk to those that are interested in exploring that conversation further. I am a fan of Atlanta city design and the larger visions for larger parks that not only support the needs of the city, but recognize that the city is not an island, that we're within a larger region. And one of the greatest things about that plan, in my opinion, is it puts out their ideas for grand visionary green spaces that are multi-jurisdictional, that triggers those types of conversations that can help us have not just a city in the forest, but a region in the forest, trail connectivity within the region. And our mayor has already attended more ARC board meetings than his predecessor, and showed up on the link trip. So I think he is someone who is supportive of the regional issues. We are at that point to wrap things up. Before we do, I'm going to ask for folks to give me a word or phrase in the areas, and this is for our three panelists, when we look at the opportunities to move Atlanta forward, give me a challenge and give me an opportunity. And I'm looking for the headline on this. So if it isn't a single word, it's something that could appear across the masthead. So I'll, since I'm really throwing this out there at the last minute, I'll allow whoever wants to jump in first, but give me a challenge and an opportunity to move Atlanta's park system forward. Go.
I'll go first. Challenge, go back to maintenance, Michael. With all the great advances that the city has made in its park system, we need to rise to the challenge of maintaining it. And the opportunity I'm going to actually steal from you. I think that you look at the Riverlands, you look at South River Forest, and the opportunity to collaborate with organizations, and we talked about a lot of them here, to make this happen. I think those are the big opportunities. But I'll call out also Nation Conservancy Conservation Fund in particular. But yep.
Thank you.
I guess
Linda, you look ready.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, go Tara, go Tara.
I would say our challenge is, our headline would be 5 years from now, 50% of the Activate ATL Recreation and Parks for All master plan has been completed. And I think our opportunity is the bond, the passing of the bond last month.
Excellent. Linda, you have the last word.
I would say, I think I have to agree with maintenance as well, because there's no point in building a great world-class park system if you can't maintain it. And I think one thing, the opportunity there is for, I've just been telling everybody, get out in your parks, look at who is out there with you, see what they're doing, and look at the joy that people experience when they're outdoors, and just start talking about it to everybody that you can. I think it is when there is a movement of people who are clamoring for something as basic and as elegant and as beautiful as parks, things start to happen. I mean, your bond measures are just that, people advocating and talking about the importance of parks and the joy that it brings them in their lives. So that's my final word there.
Well said, and I couldn't have said it better myself, so I'm going to let that be the final word. Thank you for our panelists for being part of this great session. Thank you for all of you for your insightful questions, as well as your feedback in the chat section. Please make sure to fill out the survey and let us know what you'd like to hear from next. And again, get out to a park, enjoy it, and then make sure to spread the word to kind of build our ranks, because this is something that I think we're starting to see momentum. The important thing is to seize the momentum. So as Tara said, 5 years from now, we're 50% complete on the aspirations of Activate ATL. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.